Presenting Benny Goodman and his music.
Good morning, everybody. We'll give it a moment for everybody to log on. Morning, Chris. Hey, Mona. Hey, Ann and Amy. Good morning all around, of course. Hey, Dana. Hey, Wendy. Hey, Timothy. Hey, Ann. Hey, Megler. Hey, Eric. Hey, Mary Beth. Hey, Kurt.
Benny Goodman, ladies and gentlemen, the man with the torrid clarinet and the even more torrid band who purveys assorted rhythms.
Hey, Vicky and Sheila.
In the urban room of the Congress Hotel in Chicago. And first of all
right, I'm going to log myself off here.
Blue skies.
Of the email. Morning, Christine and Karen. Hey, Dad. I assume that means my mother is out there too. Happy Mother's Day, Mom. And Grandma. And Lenore, if you're there yet. Hey, Susan. Hey, Jordana. Hey, Karen. Morning, Vicky. Hey, Beth. Hey, Melissa. Hey, Martin. Morning, Carol. Hey, Donna. Hey, Carol. Hey, Barbara. Hey, Carolyn, Kathy, Timberly. Hey, Marty. Morning, Mandy. Mandy Cripps in the house, everybody. Over in Epping, Chicago. Hey, Bob. Hey, Bridget. Hey, Kristen. I need to do my effing boat tour again pretty soon. Hey, Mary, Sue, and Lorena. Morning, Ava, Sarah, Marita, and Gail. I should have worn more comfortable shoes than this. Carrie, it's pretty dreary outside in Chicago, too, I think. Hey, Betsy. Hey, Dina. Hey, Alicia. I've only briefly looked out the window. Hey, Barbara. Hey, Pam. Gretchen, right on. Ah, Carol, sorry to hear that. May your memory be for a blessing. Hey, Joanne and Betsy. Hey, Alexandra. Hey, Georgia. Hey, Chuck, Julianne, Ann, JD, and Toby. Morning, Kathy. Morning, Gary. Semper Fi. Hey, Jan. Hey, Linda. Good morning all around. Vicky, sorry to hear that too. Hey, Megan. Morning, Tanya. Hey, David and Dathy. And Andalusia. That's Gaelic, I might not be pronouncing that right. I'll just say Dave. Morning, Linda and Heidi. Hey, Vicky. Hey, Gene. Morning, Kathy. Hey, Kathleen. Hey, Bridget and Eileen. Morning, Shelby. Thanks, Ruth. Good morning, Ed. All my heart, I say I love you dearly, for I am yours sincerely with all my heart. Morning, Bill, Barbara. Oh, you're welcome, Steve. Morning, Lynn. Hey, Mishta over on Twitch. Ah, Dave, that's interesting. Bob, if I fix Ronnie breakfast in bed right now, she'd be pretty mad that I woke her up. But, hey, Gail. Alicia, curtains I got on Society 6. Morning, Nancy.
Benny Goodman goes way back and gets a lot of rhythm out of Walk, Jenny, Walk. Benny Goodman.
This will probably be a Just Us Chickens one today. Hey, Heidi. I know the numbers for this one have been very low the whole time. I guess it's probably because it's Mother's Day. I didn't take that into account when I was freaking out about the low numbers. Huh. Hey, Mariana. Thanks, Susan. I assume my mother's out there. I haven't seen her in the chat yet. Or Lenora or Belle. Hey, Kathy. Larry Miles was climbing all over me when I was setting the tour up this morning. But now he seems to have gone to sleep. Hey, Mom, there's my mother, everybody. Happy Mother's Day, Mom. Please say the same to Cassidy, who I assume is coming over today. Ruth, yes, 204 would be quite a bit lower than we normally get on here. That's about, that'd be low numbers for the daily mini tours, really. Hey, Mom. Hey, Lisa. Dave, hope you enjoyed it. I haven't seen it since it aired. Glad to have you back, Lisa. Hey, Kathleen. Morning, Libby. Hey, Janet and Laura over on YouTube. And James on YouTube. Hey, Sherry. Hey, Chuck. Hey, Carol. Morning, Sarah and Kathy. Hey, Bridget. All right, we'll give Benny one more song to go through here, and then we'll get started properly. Hey, Denise. Morning, Kathleen. Hey, Susan. Morning, Dana. I'm not great at commemoration just in general, so if I had thought when I was listing tours that this was going to be Mother's Day, maybe I would have picked a different topic. I don't know. Hey, Christy. Hey, Juanita. Hey, Aviva. Hey, Carol. Yeah, we have lousy weather here today. Rumor is it's even going to snow a bit mixed in. Have a good brunch, Susan. Morning, Robert. Yes, happy Mothra's Day as well. Morning again over on YouTube. Yeah, Patty, I feel like women at Graceland might be a little bit weird on Mother's Day. Oh, hey, Joanne, now on YouTube. It's 50 degrees. It's not like it's going to stick today, so. And my sinuses have not been enjoying today. I think I'm mostly done with the coughing fits. Morning, Keely. Hey, Lori. Hey, Annie and Peter and Kristen. Morning, everybody. Morning, Ashley. Morning, Kim. We'll let Benny finish up this song. Hey, Jerry in Florida. All the other gambling kingpins like me. According to Patreon, according to PayPal and Venmo, anyway. Ba, ba, ba. All right. That wraps up the Benny for the moment, so I think it is time that we go ahead and get started, everybody. That is usually our cue. So, welcome along, everybody. I'm Adam Seltzer from Mysterious Chicago Tours. I've been a tour guide and historian here in Chicago for about 15 years. Got about a dozen Chicago history books out, including Mysterious Chicago, the book, and Just Kill Me, which is a novel about a ghost tour guide who makes places more haunted by killing each other. Oh, and of course, the Smart Aleck's Guide to American History as well. So, also, once again, happy Mother's Day to everybody out there today who is celebrating such a holiday. So one of my favorite things to talk about in Chicago is the huge scene of swindlers, gamblers, and con artists we had. There was a time when con artists were just about as famous as professional athletes were, at least according to Mike Royko. Really, that seems kind of like it would be counterintuitive to be a famous con artist. You kind of rely on being under the radar to make that sort of thing work. But there really were a number of con artists in Chicago who were really very well known in the day. So over the course of the next 40 minutes or so, we're going to tell some of the stories. And of course, we have to start right over here with Yellowkid Weil. Right here is a building we've been to a couple of times. This comes up on the Riverboat tours. It was on the Art Deco tour a while ago. This is Halliburton Root's Chicago Daily Post building, later the Chicago Sun-Times building, the one on the right here. It's combined with another one by the Burnham brothers. But this is where the Sun-Times operated back in the 1950s before they built this thing across the river, and then eventually moved out of that to this thing. So really, their buildings have just gotten worse and worse over the years. But one day in 1940, a guy by the name of Yellowkid Weil came into this place. Yellowkid Weil was probably the most famous con artist in Chicago over the previous half century or so. He came into this building a number of times. He was here for a whole series of articles that came out in 1940 about him. And here he is as a baby, here he is as a young man, and getting progressively older up to 1940. Then came into here again to talk with Saul Bellow for an article he was writing about him. Saul Bellow would go on to win a Nobel Prize. So 1948, Yellowkid had put out the autobiography of America's Master Swindler, as told to W.T. Brannan. Quite a bit of what we know about this guy really comes out of this, but later W.T. Brannan would try to sue the producers of the movie The Sting, because practically every con and swindle in that movie had appeared in Yellowkid Weil's autobiography. Yellowkid was born in the 1870s at some point in Chicago, though the exact date differed depending on when he was telling the story. He got his name from a comic strip character, the Yellow Kid. Now, in the autobiography, and in most things written about him since then, he said that the nickname was given to him by the famous alderman Bathhouse John Coughlin. Bathhouse and Hinky Dink were the aldermen of the first ward, like the mayors of the most notorious ward in Chicago. He said that one day he was sitting there leading the comic strip section, and Bathhouse said, "Why, you're the Yellow Kid himself." But in that 1940 article, he actually says that Hinky Dink was the one who gave him the nickname. It's kind of a thing. It's kind of like with the Joker in Batman. If he had to have a past, he kind of preferred it to be multiple choice. It's very difficult to get really solid information about the Yellow Kid. No matter how many interviews he gave, he was, after all, a swindler. But according to his autobiography, he got his start working in traveling medicine shows back in the late 1800s. Now, in the late 1800s, there were a lot of traveling medicines going around, like Clark Stanley's snake oil, which is still a synonym for fake medicine, Hamlin's wizard oil, which is a much cooler name. Frankly, I've had a chronic cough for so long, I would probably try Hamlin's cough balsam. Sounds like it would be tasty anyway. But there was a thing going around in those days that was known as the Tapeworm Fad. Now, one thing you hear quite a bit is the old urban legend that people in the Victorian era would swallow tapeworm eggs in order to lose weight. Now, it's debatable exactly to the extent to which that was true. The way Yellow Kids told the story is really there was a fad where everybody thought that they had a tapeworm. So he teamed up with a guy by the name of Doc Merriweather. This is just a generic picture, it's not actually him. But Doc Merriweather made up an elixir that was mostly rainwater, plus a little bit of nice flavoring and a natural laxative. And he would go around to small towns, gather everybody together, and say that I've got this ointment which will help you expel tapeworms. If you're suffering from nausea, if you're suffering from a loss of appetite, or if you're suffering from extreme appetite, the problem is probably that you have a tapeworm inside of your stomach. At that point, Yellow Kid, pretending to be a random person in the crowd, would say, "Sir, you came through town last year when I had a tapeworm, and it worked on my entire family. We feel better than ever, and I would like to buy 12 more bottles." Kind of makes you wonder that if it actually worked, why would he need 12 more bottles? But that was what he did in some towns. In other towns, he would actually assist with the whole demonstration of the thing. He would call a guy up who had been suffering from nausea and say, "Yes, sir, I diagnose you as having a tapeworm. Here, drink some of this absolutely free." So they would have him drink this stuff and then lie on a couch until it took effect. Then they would lead him into a small place behind a curtain to poop into a basin. Now, really, this is where the magic came in. Yellow Kid would be behind the stage where he would swap out the basin the guy pooped in with another one that he had prepared earlier with a long spiral potato peel in it. And there's a great line in the autobiography, "This, for all I knew, looked exactly like a tapeworm." So they would come out with the other basin, pull out the tapeworm and say, "Here is your tapeworm, sir. Evil-looking thing, isn't it?" And it all came out with just one quick drink of Doc Merriweather's elixir. Now, here's the thing, though. Doc Merriweather turns up all the time now in, lists of the greatest con artists of all time. Trouble is, as near as I can tell, Yellowkid Weil made the whole thing up. There's nothing outside of his autobiography that talks about this guy at all. So really, as far as we can tell, he's still swindling people after all of these years. And he'll come up fairly regularly just over the course of this particular tour. He's one guy who is a part of the swindling scene in Chicago from his birth up until his death at approximately the age of 100. But we're going to go back to the early days of Chicago here. We'll cover a guy that's been on a lot of my tours before, so I'll just kind of cover him in brief. But this is Lake Street, as it appears today. Back in the old days, it looked a little bit different. It looked about like this. But right in the middle of this place was a museum that employed a guy by the name of David Kennison. Now, David Kennison had been telling everybody that he was 112 years old and was the last surviving participant of the Boston Tea Party. And we now know the guy was absolutely lying through his teeth. I think people kind of had to know it, but he would come around to places like Free Soil meeting and abolitionist meetings and use his status as a Revolutionary War veteran in order to beef up the cause. They just liked having him around. But in 1848, he put out an ad in the paper saying, "I have taken to the museum in this city." He actually bought the museum, which I was obliged to do in order to get a comfortable living, as my pension is so small it scarcely affords the comforts of life. If I live until the 17th of November, 1848, I shall be 112 years old, and I intend making a donation party on that day at the museum. I have fought in several battles for my country. Now all I can ask of this generous public is to call at the museum on the 17th day of November and donate to me all they may think I deserve. I shall be happy to have all the traveling community call and see me at all times. So this museum was on the second floor right around where Clark and Lake is today. Now, even at the time, it was fairly well established, I think, that the guy was not. Well, the reason he wasn't getting much of a pension was because the people in charge of the pensions knew that the guy was lying. There's even this thing in his military records. In writing up these claims, do not use the data given by the letters attached. And it shows that in 1888, he swore he was 56. In 1820, 2 years later, he was 79, etc., etc. Over the course of a few years, he'd added about 40 years onto his actual date. Now, whether he actually saw any civil Revolutionary War service is debatable. He would have been very young, and it certainly wouldn't have been at the Boston Tea Party. But I still get letters from people who absolutely insist to me that it was all true. The whole thing was true. He really was a Chicago hero. There are certain people who get really mad when I try to separate fact from fiction on things. So we're going to move up just about a decade or so into history, into the 1860s. This is an early moving picture. People in those days were just stunned by exactly what a big deal gambling was in the United States. People who came over from overseas would talk quite a lot about just what a hold gambling had on the United States. People would always use expressions like "you betcha" and "you bet your life." And "Phoenix, yes, we can see you. We were worried about you the other night." But this is the inside of a typical gambling parlor in Chicago. This one would have been on Randolph Street, right about where the Oriental, the Nederlander Theater is now. So, before that was built there, and you've probably seen this area before. We've done this on many tours. This is where Al Capone was caught driving drunk in the early 1920s, the first time he ever made the newspaper. But as of the 1860s, it looked like this and was known as Hair Trigger Block. It was basically nothing but gambling parlors and saloons and stables, which tended to break out into a whole lot of fights. In that, the biggest couple was George and Molly Trussell, who were not actually married. Molly was also just known by the name of Irish Molly sometimes, but George ran a place right over there near Randolph and Dearborn, Randolph and Clark area. Then their romance was so famous as to even inspire a novel called Queen of the Dimond, Gay Life in Chicago. But he was her man, but he done her wrong. He was kind of the gambling kingpin of the city, but being a gambling kingpin was something that the ladies loved in those days, and he took full advantage. So one night, Molly got all dressed up, as seen here, came to the gambling parlor that he was running, walked in with a pistol, and then shot him to death. So this all took place right about where the Nederlander Theater is now, formerly the Oriental. But he didn't die right inside of the place. He stumbled back into the alley out back, which incidentally is now the place that is usually referred to as the Alley of Death and Mutilation. It shows up on every ghost tour in Chicago because seem to be missing the picture here. But it shows up on every ghost tour around here now because it's also where the Iroquois Theater fire was back in 1903. So when people go out there looking for ghosts, they're always looking for ghosts from the Iroquois, but who's to say it's not the ghost of George Trussell still haunting the place? On slower days, in my ghost tour days, I used to bring that one up every now and then. Over the next generation, gambling would become so enshrined within the city and so enmeshed in local politics that we even had guys like Mike Mcdonald, who operated a place called The Store over here at the northwest corner of Clark and... I've lost my space here. It was on Clark Street, but bizarrely I could never actually find a picture of it. Clark and Madison, I think. So This is Mike Mcdonald, the gambling kingpin of the place. The store was a 4-story gambling emporium that he operated in Chicago in the 1860s, 1870s, well up through the 1880s. Eventually, he got involved in city politics. They said that he was the guy who was putting the mayor in office and was kind of operating as the power behind the throne, and even managed to personally appoint most of the board of county commissioners, who were handpicked for being guys who were really open to graft. Eventually, the board that he put in place would come to be known as the Boodle Board because they were so frequently caught. Let's take a look for a second here at the courthouse. This is the courthouse, the old county courthouse building as it stands today, having been rebuilt in 1892. Initially, it was we had another one before the Great Chicago Fire. 1872, another was built on this spot that looked like this. And this one was supposed to last a lot longer than it did. It only lasted for about 20 years or so. But after about 10 years, in the 1880s, they were worried that it was already starting to fall apart. So, with help from Mike Mcdonald, a guy by the name of Henry Holland showed up. And Henry Holland had this stuff called Professor C.O. Lundberg's stone preserving process. He said, now, Mike and I have a plan here. We are going to cover up that entire building in Professor Lundberg's stone preserving process that will keep the building for 200 years. You won't have to worry about maintenance ever again. All it'll cost you is $30,000. Now, I should point out, Mike Mcdonald had been a con artist for years. He got his start working candy scams on trains. He used to walk up and down on train cars selling candy to people. It wouldn't be until they got home and opened up the box that they realized that it was only about half full because he had mixed the rest of the candy into other candy boxes to increase his stock. Later, he was involved in what was called the soap scam. That would be he would show up to sell bars of soap, and he'd have a whole big box of them. He'd say, look, folks, I'm going to insert a $20 bill into this bar of soap and a $5 bill into this bar of soap. Now I will mix them all up, and now they are for sale. So you might be the lucky one who gets a $20 bill in the bar of soap. Then he would sell most of the stuff. And then we would get down to just a couple of bars left and start having an auction because nobody had found the $20 bills yet. And then at the end, they would have sold the last couple of bars of soap for often more than $20. But the people would, of course, get home and find no bills inside of the place. So now here he was in charge of the county commissioners and bringing in this guy, Henry Holland, to cover up all of the courthouse in what was known as C.O. Lundberg's stone preserving process, which was actually just a mixture of lead paint and linseed oil. Now, later on, William Boyington, who designed things like the gates at Rose Hill Cemetery, would say that it didn't work one little bit, but it took him 20 years to work through the case. After he was done coating it, he had initially quoted him $30,000, then presented the city with a bill for $140,000. And then the thing fell apart anyway. It wasn't until 1908, more than 15 years after this building had been taken down completely to be replaced with this one, that they finally got around to the whole Boodle Board thing, and went into court, and it finally got around to paying the guy. It wasn't necessarily his fault that the stuff didn't work. Now, in 1875, in the middle of all of this, a reporter came around to Mike Mcdonald and said, you know what we should do for these gamblers and con artists in the city? Bring back the whipping post. So you can imagine this reporter must have just gotten swindled or something and had a bit of a sore spot. So he came to Mike Mcdonald and said, here's what I think we should do. Whip them. Mike Mcdonald said, that's a great idea. Think of all the gambling we could do with a whipping post. We could gamble about which lash will draw blood, how many lashes it'll take before the guy passes out. This is a gold mine. Great idea. Thanks. McDonald himself was not necessarily lucky in love. His wife at one point shot a police officer when they were raiding the store, the gambling operation that he was running. He was always very suspicious of her. When she went off to Europe to hide out, he hired a priest to accompany her and be like her chaperone and make sure she stayed out of trouble. Instead, she ended up divorcing him and marrying the priest. He married another young woman named Dora Feldman, a rabbi's daughter after that, not wanting anything to do with people who would be running around with priests. But after a few years of marriage, she took up with a sketch artist named Webster Gernon. Webster Gernon was about 15 when they started having an affair. She was somewhere in her late 20s. The affair lasted for about 10 years until finally she came to his studio one day and shot him to death. This dragged on in court for quite a little while, but in the middle of it, she ended up being acquitted, mostly because Mike Mcdonald had enough money to make that happen. He died in the middle of court proceedings. She went off to live in California thereafter, and he is now buried up at Mount Olivet Cemetery, right near Mrs. O'Leary. Mrs. O'Leary and her son, Big Jim, also a gambling kingpin, is right across the street, is right across the road. The two wives are notably not present inside of here. But all the time that he was operating in the city, up on the what was then called the North Division over on the beach, we also had one of our more famous guys. In the neighborhood that is now known as Streeterville. Here we've got the Wanda Vista Tower. Don't know why I disappeared there. But in this neighborhood, this was still the lake as of the late 19th century, up till about 1888, when a guy named Captain George Wellington Streeter, at least according to the way he told the story, crashed his houseboat onto the shore and started charging people money to dump their garbage around the boat. Now, the city was actually filling in this place anyway to make Lakeshore Drive, but he forged himself a bunch of deeds, this is a statue of him, and claimed squatters' rights on the land for many, many years. So, eventually, for about 30 years, he tied this place up. He declared that not only was it land that he owned, he claimed that it was his own independent country of which he was the emperor. And it took the cops 30 years to get rid of him. Now, in the process, there weren't just legal battles, there were gunfights and everything. At one point, they kicked him off of the land, said that he could not actually live here, so he found a way around it. He found that at the time, they didn't really have parking laws. So he mounted his houseboat onto an automobile and effectively invented the automobile motorhome. Now, mobile homes have gone around for a very long time. There were caravans back in the old days, but automobile motorhomes may have been invented by Captain Streeter. He just parked his boat instead of sailing it in, and they found that they couldn't really do too much about it. He eventually did lose the Battle of Garbage Hill, but his funeral was a really big affair. It was attended by all of the local gentry, and again, we now have a statue of the guy. He is presently buried up here at Graceland Cemetery. It even says captain on his gravestone, even though I don't think he was ever really officially a captain. He made various claims about that. Another guy whose past was kind of multiple choice. But once again, we now have a full-size statue of the guy, which is how we treat our swindlers and con artists around here. But over the course that he was filling in that land, we also had the greatest opportunity for graft that the city may have ever presented, which was the World's Fair of 1893. Now, everybody knew that this was going to attract a large criminal element. It actually ended up attracting quite a lot less of one than people think. It's very common to hear that there was a huge list of missing people after the fair. There were fewer missing people than in an average year, but certainly there was a lot of crime going on. The Chicago Journal put out this terrific line, "Thieves on the run, thugs flocking to Chicago from every corner. Carter Harrison's nomination the primary cause." They were really insisting that if Carter Harrison were reelected to another term as mayor, every single criminal in the world would know that Chicago was wide open and they might as well show up. And he was elected. The extent to which they really showed up is another thing, but among them was this guy by the name of Tim O'Brien, or Tom O'Brien, who made an absolute fortune on the gold brick scam during the World's Fair. Now, during the World's Fair, we had something like 27 million paid admissions. Exactly how many people that was, there were a lot of repeat visitors, so it's hard to know exactly how many people came to town, but it was a lot, and a lot of them were people from really small towns who were not necessarily streetwise. So Tom O'Brien would find these guys and play a scam that he is sometimes said to have invented called the gold brick scam. He would pull up this brick that was made to look like it was made out of gold, maybe even knock off a part of it that really was gold so they could test it and say, "Listen, I got some hot property here. I'm not supposed to have this. If anybody finds out that I have it, I'm going to be in trouble. I can't even try to sell it or anything at the stores, but you could. This thing is worth thousands. I got to get rid of it fast. I will sell it to you for just 50 or $100. However much he thought the guy could spare. And of course, they all thought, wow, I'm getting something for nothing. For $50, I'll get this brick made out of gold that I can go sell for thousands and thousands. So they would give him the money. He would disappear. And of course, when they tried to sell it, they'd find that it was mostly lead and worth exactly just about nothing. He got away with this over and over again until finally he went over to Paris and ended up in kind of a shooting duel, shot a guy to death, and his wife was able to get him just life imprisonment, but he disappears from the record after that. And of course, our most famous swindler during the World's Fair was H.H. Holmes, the Devil in the White City guy, who is often said to have been killing people during the World's Fair. That's wildly exaggerated. He killed maybe a couple people during the fair. But really, he was a swindler first and foremost.
No, they were...
Like, this is one of the boxes of the legal archives full of all of the lawsuits and all of the paperwork from lawsuits when he got sued over and over again. He saw the World's Fair as a huge money-making opportunity because he knew that every furniture dealer, every merchant in town, really, knew that they were planning to get rich off of this World's Fair. So he went around to places with letters that looked like this, saying, "Gentlemen, please deliver to H.H. Holmes hardware, and I will pay for it. Yours truly, H.S. Campbell." Everybody was being way too free with credit, so they didn't check to see whether H.S. Campbell was even a real person. He used all of these things to add a third floor onto his building that he said was going to be a hotel space for the World's Fair. Really, he never intended it to be a hotel for real. It was all just really a vehicle for swindling. It was never opened or finished or open for business or anything. He would just buy things like furniture, hardware, mattresses, bedding, whatever you could possibly need to furnish a hotel. Plus, he was swindling people who lived on the second floor of the building as investors. He went around to every insurance company. And lo and behold, it caught fire a couple of months later. He wasn't such a good swindler that he didn't get caught. I was able to find about 60 different lawsuits in the legal archives. He was audacious, but not particularly good. Let's move forward in history just about a decade here. Now here we have the Marquette Building, which was one of the haunts of a woman by the name of Gladys the Green. Gladys the Green was a woman who every day would go to one of the garages and rent the one green car in town. She would also dress all in green, including a green veil, and would just drive around attracting attention. This was the kind of thing you could do in those days. These newfangled automobiles were still not that common a sight. A green one would have been especially weird. A woman in green would have been especially weird. So people were all talking, who is this woman in green? And she would use this notoriety to go into hotels, find people who'd come in from out of town but had maybe heard of her, strike up affairs with them, and then blackmail them. This was all fairly above board. She had a lawyer's office over here in the Marquette Building, which at the time would have been really brand new. But check out this car that she's driving here. This was usually, I believe, rented from a guy by the name of Dan Canary's garage. Another one of their customers was Yellowkid Weil. And one day, in 1904, a guy answering to the name of Mr. Dove came and rented one of the automobiles here, drove off with a chauffeur. You didn't drive your own car in those days. You had to hire a chauffeur too. Drove clear out into the western suburbs. Then Mr. Dove shot the young driver to death and disappeared. It was a huge mystery. Nobody could track exactly who Mr. Dove was, what the motive could have been, or anything. By most metrics, it was the first person ever murdered in an automobile. Now, then the Chicago police came up with a theory. They believed that Mr. Dove was really Yellowkid Weil, the well-known con artist, even at the time. So they started making announcements. We're pretty sure it's him. We've just got to find him. So Weil got together with his lawyers. He had, in fact, rented that same car just about a week before. But in this case, they took him to they had announced in the papers that the doorman at the Congress Hotel says that he's absolutely sure he could identify Mr. Dove. So they brought Weil up to the Congress Hotel, had him just strike up a conversation with the doorman. Then eventually the lawyer came and said, hey, you guys seem to know each other pretty well. And the doorman said, nope, just met the guy for the first time. And they said, okay, we're going to the police station, so you can tell them that right now. So everybody had to apologize. It turned out, in fact, that Mr. Dove was not Mr. Weil. This was one of several times that he got out of sticky situations like this. But meanwhile, he had moved on to some other cons, mostly related to horse races. One of the more famous ones involved a place called the Red Path Saloon that turns up on a handful of my tours. It's one of those places, it's a little nothing location, but it just comes up over and over again. It was located right over here in the block that was always known as Pickwick Place. Would have been on the right-hand side. He would take people out here and say, now listen, I am one of the owners at the Hawthorne racetrack, so I happen to know. You know how we stay in business? is that once a year, we fix one of the races. That's how we end up making money, because we're not the ones handling the money and the payouts or anything. That's all done elsewhere. So once a year we fix it so we can make a killing. Now, I happen to know this horse is going to come in with 10 to 1 odds. You got to put down some money on it. And the guy would say, well, I guess I could probably put down $200. And Weil would say, $200, man? This is a sure thing. Put all the money you have on it and you'll increase your net worth by 1,000%. So the guy would, in fact, say, okay, I'll see how much I can get together. They would take him down to Red Path Saloon and say, now listen, naturally, we can't just do this at the racetrack. We're going to use my betting commissioner. If somebody puts down this much money on this horse, it'll affect the odds. People will realize think that somebody must know something about it. So he would give it to the betting commissioner to spread out at various places, and then, of course, the horse would not win. And in the background, Weil might have actually bribed the jury to pull the horse back a little, the jockey to hold the horse back a little bit. And this guy might be devastated and crushed, but what could you really do? It's not really illegal not to fix a horse race. That's what Weil said anyway. It didn't protect you from getting beaten up now and then. I believe he was beat up several times when people caught him and stuff like this. But he was a very famous guy. It was amazing that no more people didn't recognize him as distinctive as he looked. But also one of his favorite hangouts was a place called Butterly's Buffet, which was located on Broadway, probably a little further north than this, but somewhere in the general vicinity of the Green Mill, which is still extant. But it was here that he started meeting with a guy by the name of Big Jack Strassnider. Big Jack Strassnider was one of the architects of what became to be known as the wire fraud con. This was another kind of horse race con where they would tell people, listen, a lot of these betting parlors, they're just getting things in from the telegraph office about saying that they're off. They're getting stuff back saying who the winners are. If we could get them to hold off on sending the thing, but give us a signal about who won, we can make an absolute killing. Now, guess what? I know a guy who works at the Board of Trade where they have the whole telegraph office. He's the one who goes through the gold wire to send to all the pool rooms. So here's what let's do. Let's go have a meeting with my brother-in-law. And they would go to have a guy with a green visor on and a pencil behind his ear that would look like he worked the telegraph. And he'd say, well, gee, guys, I don't know. This is really dangerous stuff. Of course I could do it, but I could get in so much trouble. They'd say, well, yeah, but I know you've got loan sharks knocking on your door. If we make this happen, we'll cut you in. We'll all make a fortune. So they would pretend that they were going to be getting this sure thing signaled in. Then, of course, they would go there and try. The best way to do it was to trip them up a little bit. Say, okay, the horse's name is Midnight Bourbon. They would get the call saying, Midnight Bourbon, first place. The guy would put all his money down on Midnight Bourbon. Then the race would come in, and Midnight Bourbon would come in second. And really, this race had probably not even happened at all. So he would lose all the money. He said, but they got the money. He said, no, he said 2 place, not first place. Now, you'll notice this happens almost word for word in the Sting. And I'm going a little over time tonight, I'm afraid, so let's move on up a little bit. So, at the same time that all this was going on, the early 20th century, the early days of, well, that was in the early days of telegraphing by then, but right across the street from Marshall Fields was Frank Ryan's Clairvoyant Parlor. It was a psychic place. People would come here to get their fortunes told by this guy here. Officially named as James or Frank Ryan, but usually operating under the name Professor Charles Crane, which isn't the most mystical sounding name he could have thought up. Let me move myself down here a little bit so I look like I'm this guy. There. So Professor Charles Crane was a phony psychic. He never claimed to be anything else, but he would have people come in to have their fortunes read, and every now and then, one of these people coming in would be a recently widowed woman who had an awful lot of money. He would find this out through all of the usual tricks that phony seances would pull. And then he would say, now, I'm also getting another message from the spirits. They're saying that you have money and you need to know what to do with it. Well, here, they're giving me the name of this bond or this copper mine. And he would get them into putting thousands of dollars into junk bonds or bonds that he had stolen, bonds that didn't even really exist that he had forged. Now, he would do this to the tune of making something in the range of $10,000 a month. Out of about 50 or 60 fake seances a day, which would make him enough money as it was, he was making an awful lot of money selling junk bonds and phony bonds. The way that he got away with this for so long, and this eventually he did get caught. He gave a whole speech to the newspapers about exactly how the suckers were trimmed. And they asked him, well, is there anything to the psychic stuff? And he just laughed. Ended up being on a big trial. The reason it was such a big case is the reason that he had gotten away with it so long is he was using a guy by the name of Burch to pay off the cops. Really, an awful lot of swindlers were using this same guy. Burch was a guy who ran a saloon in Chicago, but was best known in the 1910s as being the fixer. If you wanted to pay off the cops, he was the guy who would make it happen. He had quite a number of police officers on his payroll, and eventually in 1914, when he was getting caught and being brought in, a couple of the detectives tried to shoot him to death before he could squeal. But he survived, went on to be a power in the vice world in Chicago well through the 1920s, eventually allied with Bugs Moran before dying in 1937. He's a guy that I feel like ought to be researched a bit more. This particular trial is one that's kind of been forgotten in Chicago, but it's such a cool story, so I think I might do a bit of, more of a deep dive on it one of these days. But meanwhile, in the 1910s and 1920s, as all this was going on, con artists were particularly popular people at a place called the Dill Pickle Club. Now, this is right across the street from Washington Square Park in the Gold Coast, the near north side. Now, right over here is this alley, which is officially known as Tooker Place. There are still maps that call it Tooker. And in the middle of it, back in the old days, was this door that said, "Step high, stoop low, and leave your dignity outside." It was the Dill Pickle Club, the hangout for weirdos in Chicago. The owner liked to bring in anybody who was a nut about something to address the crowd. It was called an open forum, kind of like an open mic for weirdos. But here's a sample of their upcoming events. The physiology and significance of flappers and cake eaters. Cake eaters were like male flappers. Or Ben Reitman, famous hobo doctor, would be giving a talk on life and death in Bohemia. Thomas Davy would be talking about the American Legion. And then Dr. John Luttenberger would do a talk called Does Nature Compensate? This was actually a very popular place to go. They also got in celebrities like Mae West after she had been arrested for doing her play Sex. And Yellowkid Weil would come up pretty regularly. He would be brought in to talk about his art as a con artist and would do so just by demonstrating. He would go in and convince the audience that he needed $10 really fast and take the audience for $10, which to them probably would have been a pretty good amount of money. They also at one point managed to get Cap Streeter to come in and give him a talk, which according to the paper, he covered everything except the ethical code of the dinosaurs. Now, by this time, getting into the 1920s, 1930s, Yellowkid was getting fairly famous. He had been written up all over the place. There's one particularly fun article. Feel free to chuckle at this. Yellowkid ignores boobs. And of course, they meant fools at the time. But one of the things that he always told reporters is that he never went for just regular marks and suckers. He always swindled rich people. He used to say that the upper crust is full of crumbs. Bank owners, all of those guys are shady. Certainly the ones that he worked with were shady, including there was a guy by the name of Big John Worthington, also known as Honest John Worthington. Now, that Fox character in Pinocchio is named Honest John Worthington Foulfellow, probably named after this guy who was also known around Chicago eventually as the Wolf of LaSalle Street. So, Yellowkid claimed that he gave him that nickname. Now, the Wolf of LaSalle Street was a guy who went into business as a banker on LaSalle Street. Officially, he was running a regular bank, but his vice president was Yellowkid Weil. What they were really doing was passing off things like stolen bonds, stolen securities, stolen jewelry. In fact, Worthington even had a whole network of robbers who were working for him. Mail robbers, skyscraper robbers. There was a guy named Melville Reeves, known as the Skyscraper Burglar. What he would do is he would go into skyscrapers after hours. It wasn't that hard to get into them in those days. He would have a pencil behind his ear and his sleeves rolled up. Everybody assumed that he would be supposed to be there. Over the years, he stole millions of dollars worth of things like stocks and bonds out of the place. But you couldn't just go sell those normally. You had to find a good fence. That was where Honest John Worthington came in. Now, eventually, Melville Reeves was caught stealing a book of stamps from the London Guarantee Building. After all his career, it was a book of stamps that did him in. So John Worthington was kind of a cause celeb in the city for a while. His daughter tried to be a silent film actress. The world may call him Wolf, but I shall always call him Dad and love him. Eventually, after he died, the will became a whole thing. Here's a bunch of guys posing for the reporters, pretending that they're searching for the guy's original will. Well, also, I'm just about to the edge of time here. But just yesterday for the morning mini tour, we went down to Monroe Street to check out the Majestic building, which still stands today. The third floor of the Majestic Theater, which you can see was continuous vaudeville in the theater. Then most of the rest of it was offices, including the office of a guy by the name of Leo Koretz. Leo Koretz would be the best Ponzi schemer that Chicago saw, while Mr. Ponzi was perfecting the Ponzi scheme, where you get investors to give you a lot of money by promising them ridiculous returns on investment, which you pay out to the early ones by attracting new investors. Now, he had been a victim of a phony land scheme in Florida. Somebody did the old, I've got some great land in Florida to sell you, here, just buy it now. Then he would go down to Florida and find that it was nothing but worthless swampland. Koretz saw this and thought, hey, that's a cool way to make money. Now, Yellowkid Weil had done something like this too. He had heard about this scam and thought, you know what? I could do this a little bit closer to legally. He got himself a whole bunch of completely valueless land in Florida, the kind that you could sell for less than $1 per acre. Then instead of selling it, he gave it away. He would meet people and say, hey, you know, I'm building this whole neighborhood in Florida. You look like the kind of guy who ought to be my neighbor. Why don't I just give you this land for free? All you'll have to do is go down and get the abstract drawn up and have the title transferred. Then he would send him to somebody who was actually working for Yellowkid to do all of the paperwork and all of the filing fees. So after all of this, you would end up making about $300 an acre on stuff that was worth less than $1. Koretz took this a bit further. He claimed to have about 5 million acres of land down in Panama that was not only rich with pines and timber, people made a fortune in lumber in those days, but also claimed that he had found oil in it. So he had this place, the Bayano River Syndicate. He said that if you invest in this, we will get you a 60% per year return on investment. And for a while this worked. He managed to keep this going for years. People were literally banging on his door, begging him to take their money that they wanted to invest. Until finally, after several years of getting away with this, somebody finally went down to Panama to check out this land and found that really there was no oil there were no wells, there were no tanks, there was not even any timber. This was just some valueless land down in Panama. He had swindled everybody, you can see here below me, up to and including his own mother had been swindled in this scheme. So when this came out, he fled Chicago for a while, ended up living under an assumed name in Canada for a bit, was eventually brought back, put on trial, and sent to jail in Joliet, where he found a rather unique way to commit suicide. He was diabetic, and he committed suicide by eating a box of chocolates that put him into a diabetic coma. Now, he was recently the subject of a book called Empire of Deception by Dean Job, which is a really remarkable book. It's one of those guys, it's amazing that this guy didn't become more famous than he was. Ponzi was already famous. They already called this scheme the Ponzi scheme at the time. If they had caught Koretz first, it might have been known as the Koretz scheme. But let's move up just a little bit closer to the future. By the 1970s, the Yellow Kid was retired. He was living in a nursing home up on North Sheridan that still stands today. It was announced that he would be celebrating at one point his 100th birthday, though whether he was really 100 years old or not was one of those things where it depends on whether you choose to believe him or not. The exact date of his birth is a little bit fishy, but he was definitely close to 100. So this is up on North Sheridan Street. This is the nursing home where he lived the last several years of his life. And while he was still living here, The Sting came out. He never went to see it, though his co-author tried to sue the producers for $50 million. Now, when he died at about the age of 100, he owned a plot at Rose Hill Cemetery, but for one reason or another, Rose Hill wouldn't allow him to be buried there. They said it was a thing about money. Other people suggested they just didn't want Yellow Kid buried in their cemetery. So he is now buried in an unmarked grave, I assume it's an unmarked grave, at Archer Woods Cemetery. Maybe one of these days we'll track him down. Before I close, I want to say a few brief things. I don't know if you guys have heard of the news yet, but the architect Helmut Jahn, who designed things like the City Center and the Thompson Center here in Chicago, passed away yesterday after a bicycling accident. So R.I.P. to Helmut Jahn. A quick plug for the upcoming tours. On Thursday night is a brand new one called Bronzeville Tales that I've been putting together. And next Sunday, I will be out of town next Sunday morning. I'm going to Des Moines, Iowa. You can see on the 15th, we're going to be live streaming a speech I'm giving at the unveiling of the new location of the naked Trike-Angel statue, which is a whole other story unto itself. But I'll stick around in town and find someplace with Wi-Fi on the next morning to do Oakwood Cemetery once again. Haven't done that one for a while. And of course, over here on Mysterious Chicago's Facebook, we do mini tours every morning. Mondays are Mural Monday, Fridays are Find a Grave Friday. The rest of the time, you never know what we're going to cover. Yesterday, we went and saw the majestic building where Leo Koretz had his office still standing. And Friday, on 6:30 on Fridays, on the Patty Vasquez Show Facebook page, we do a show called Whiskey and a Cookie, which... in which Patty and friends, including myself, drink whiskey, eat cookies, and discuss the events of the week. Now, should you need a Mysterious Chicago sweatshirt, hoodie, coffee mug, etc., like these fine Georgia voters, including my mom, Happy Mother's Day, my grandmother, Happy Mother's Day, just go to cafepress.com/MysteriousChicago. They will hook you up with everything you need. And with that, everybody, I will put the Benny Goodman back on, and we will just hang out. Happy Mother's Day, R.I.P. to Helmut Jan, and thanks for joining me, everybody. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Mandy. Thank you all for helping me keep the lights on. This was a lower number one than usual, but I knew it was going to be. Thank you, Janet. Thanks, Marita. I've only done this one once, so some of these stories I had only told the once 5 months ago. I had to basically relearn everything today. Thanks, Bernie. Yeah, Thompson Center's been up for sale for a while now. It's even considered an endangered building. Personally, I like the place. Thanks, Diane. Thanks, Keely. Thanks, Dina. Bob, I'm fine with finding Miles. Next week, I'll have to, bring some pictures or something of Miles since he won't be around me. But I'll go find him in a minute. The Thompson Center's always been a controversial building in Chicago. Some people absolutely hate it. Personally, I like it. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Lorena. Mandy asks over in the effing group chat, was Honest John also the inspiration for Honest John in American Tail? I doubt it. He was pretty much forgotten by then. Doubt that. Nice, Pam.
And that would put rhythm in the feet of a wooden Indian. That was the bugle call rag, Benny Goodman's own arrangement. Now, the popular tune, Thanks a Million.
Phoenix, I'll pass it on. Glad to see you out there, Phoenix. We got worried about you the other night. Hey, Denise, thanks. Thanks, Debbie. Oh, another question I missed in the comments that Mandy passed along about Gladys the Green. Were women allowed to drive at the time? Yeah, they were allowed to. It would have been fairly uncommon. Usually when you rented a car, you also rented the chauffeur because people didn't necessarily know how to drive in 1904. It was still a brand new thing. But it would have been up to the garage whether they would rent or sell to a woman or not. In those days, that was still legal that they could make that rule, but it wasn't like a government thing. Have a good day, Megan. Carol, my stepson is going to Columbia here in Chicago. Morning, Nancy. Nancy, you know this is the end of the tour. It started at 10 Central. Now we're just doing the post-tour hang.
Down Harlem Way, they're all trucking. And here's Helen Ward to tell you all about her. Trucking.
Let's look up what tour I did last Mother's Day. I do not remember. This weather is messing with my sinuses pretty bad. I haven't been coughing as much the last few days. Today it's all back. Thanks, Peter and Kristen. All right, see you, Mandy. Avenue in it, all over town. Thanks, Christy. Who owned the Green Mill? That's an interesting question. People like to say that Machine Gun Jack McGurn owned it, but that's also been denied. It's a bit tricky to figure that out. They haven't heard a thing from PayPal. They're just ignoring me now. Now, if you go to the Eventbrite pages for each event and do a donate ticket, you can use PayPal to pay and I'll still get it. But I can't take PayPal payments myself anymore. Chris, yeah, they had to clean all of the downtown buildings in those days. The soot from things like the trains and the factories nearby. There were a lot more of them. Were I involved in on the Smithsonian Channel? Yeah, I was a talking head on the Smithsonian Channel thing. I haven't seen it yet, so I don't know how much of me they used. Thanks, Sue. Thanks, Jackie. See ya. Now, starting in about the 1970s, the Green Mill started having a lot of stories about Al Capone being there. Most of it's nonsense. I don't think there's any real evidence that he ever set foot in the place. Do cemeteries allow you to do night tours with groups? No, they do not. I keep trying. Thanks, Phoenix. 42. I know from the emails I got about the Smithsonian thing that apparently I suggested that the Chicago police did not do a great job. I don't even know an urban legend version of it in which they did. Yeah, that's the thing with the nighttime cemetery events are tricky because there's a lot of stuff you can trip over in them, and they don't have any lighting whatsoever. Yeah, but Bohemian National used to do a flashlight tour until somebody got hurt. I think they had overbooked it considerably. We did have to do one nighttime event at Graceland one time. Called Into the Veil. It wasn't a tour, it was more of a party. It was super cool. We hope to do it again sometime. Yeah, Phoenix, we didn't know what happened. None of us with any banning powers did anything to ban you in there. Or put you in Facebook jail or whatever, so we didn't know what was up. If there's anything we can do to fix it over at Whiskey and a Cookie on the Patty Show, we'll make sure of it. Dina, I don't remember. Sometimes it gets kind of weird with the Peitzel thing. Like one show that I did, they really wanted to focus all on Frank Geyer, the detective, but they didn't want to talk about dead children. It's like, so what am I supposed to say about Geyer? His whole job was to find dead children. He said, well, what did he find when he came into the castle building? He was there for about 5 minutes, walked around, said, and walked away. That's about it. Miguel, yes, Rose Hill is occasionally known to do like a 5K at night. I very much doubt they would let me do tours there at night. They've been getting a lot of letters. I think it got posted in like a White Pride Chicago group what I say about Wilbur F. Story, the obnoxiously racist newspaper editor there. So now they're telling, if you got family here, email them and complain about this guy. And Graceland gets it too, but Graceland knows what's up and has my back. A little more than Rose Hill does. Rose Hill's a little more corporate. Sure, I don't think I've been to Bronzewood Cemetery.
And we'll let the title speak for itself. Benny Goodman presenting Madhouse.
Oh, Pamela, that's rough. Laura, I would think so too. And some of them do. Suzanne, I've definitely done stuff at Mount Carmel. Queen of Heaven I haven't done as much with. I understand that most of the notable people there seem to be buried in the mausoleum, which makes it harder to do for Find a Grave Friday. We have done some Find a Graves at Mount Carmel. It's just kind of a commute for me to get after that one. So I think on Friday I'll be en route to Des Moines, so I'm making some plans to stop at cemeteries like midway between that are on the way. There's one that I've been to before that was really cool. We'll probably go there. But far, far from Chicago. Like mysterious Chicago, far from home. Gotta say, Spider-Man Far From Home, enjoyed it a lot, but as a school tour guide, the school tour scenes about gave me a heart attack. Adam, it would make it easier if they're letting people into mausoleums these days. But a lot of times they're not. And also, you gotta be real quiet in a mausoleum. Thank you, Karen. Thanks, Luann.
And here's a short encore portion of Benny Goodman's forthright invitation at the beginning of his program. Let's dance.
Carol, no, Ronnie is having a spa day the weekend that I'm in Iowa. Oh, yeah, let me go find Miles. Oh, that's easy. Hey, Miles. Can you say hi to everybody?
We have been presenting the music of Benny Goodman and his orchestra from the Joseph Urban Room of the Congress Hotel on Michigan Avenue in Chicago.
There's the guy himself. Let me rewind the Benny a bit. Just not a proper mysterious Chicago tour. Hey, Ronnie and I both hit those 2 plus 2 weeks this week, so she is looking forward to a spa day. Yeah, Miles is kind of sleepy right now. This guy went and rolled around in the tub after the shower so he could get wet and get dried off, because he loves getting dried off. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And they all loved it. They all loved those bastards when they played by Benny Goodman. And now another one just in the same vein, Rosetta.
Yep. Do I have any good programs for good for a chapter at DAR? I could probably come up with something. Hop on down, Miles. Heavy boy. Yeah, about time for lunch here, too. Plus, I think I'm gonna go get Ronnie some donuts. Alright, yeah, I've got to go on a donut run. So thanks a lot for joining me, everybody. Let me just scroll back here to plug the upcoming events one more time. So Thursday night will be a brand new one called Bronzeville Tales that I've been putting together over the course of the last week or so. Some fantastic stories out of that neighborhood. Followed on Sunday, I will be on the road without Miles, but I will find a place to broadcast for Oakwood Cemetery. So, hey Tim, sorry we're late here. Sorry you've come in a bit late here. The tour was at 10 a.m. Central, so we're just kind of finishing up the post-show hang, but it'll all be available to rewatch later on. So everybody, thanks a lot for joining me today. I'm Adam Seltzer for Mysterious Chicago Tours. Lots of good stuff coming up. Hope to see you at all of these. And until then, stay safe, stay strong, stay warm, stay dry. Have a happy Mother's Day, and if you can, stay spooky.